On today's episode, we learn that guns have more rights than women, that sex is a class privilege, that the Bible is actually pro-choice, that tenants are the ones who actually own a property, and finally, we analyze how carnivals and the economy are related. This is Cringe Posts. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of the Cringe Post podcast. This is the podcast where we gather the cringiest political and cultural takes that we see in our feeds each week, and we break down where they went wrong, what they could do a little bit better, and point out their underlying assumptions. Hopefully, we'll also have a little bit of fun along the way. My name is Britt, and I'm here with my co-host Donnie. And before we get started, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our show. It really helps us out, all that engagement. And we also just love hearing from you. And as a reminder, if you're listening to this podcast and you want to see the Cringe Posts that we take on, you can go to cringepost.com, and there's a visual show companion there that you can look at. Before we poke fun at other people, it's a tradition on this show for us to poke fun at ourselves. Sometimes we have cringy political takes in our past. Sometimes we just have cringy social takes in our past. And today we are going to look at a cringy take from Donald. And he tweets out on July 27th, 2010, "Twitter isn't that social," with no retweets or likes.
No, no. Here's why this is cringe to me. Okay, note the date, July 27, 2010. I'm pretty sure that I made my Twitter account on July 4th, 2010. So it's like you're on a platform for, I don't know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and you're like, oh man, it's not social at all here. In particular, a platform like Twitter, where it's less of a thing like your Facebook friend connections networks and more of a follower. Like you have something to say, and then there are interactions that follow. But in a very, very, very shallow way, it makes me think of the St. Augustine quote: "Never judge a philosophy by its abuse." And it's kind of like, don't judge a platform by its misuse, right? I don't know. I just joined Twitter. I like scream into the void with stupid things that no one cares about. I'm like, man, this place isn't so social. Some social media it is. I feel like I'm some clever person.
It is kind of interesting. I mean, we've got, I guess, the rate at which social media platforms are coming out has kind of accelerated. But I remember a couple transitions in my life, like from MySpace to Facebook. And I remember talking with people, and I thought, Facebook's for kids, MySpace is for grown-ups. And then someone told me, it's like, no, actually, like, Facebook's like way more grown-up and awesome and everything. And I don't think anyone would know how to use the Facebook of 2009 or anything like that anymore. Just like the GUI and all that, it was just all messed up. It's just weird how like all these things emerged, and like what you think about it, and you're like, oh, it's social media, but no one's talking with me. So
yeah, it's like, it can't be social if I don't have any followers. It sounds like one of those meme Turning Point USA Charlie Kirk ones. Like, oh yeah, if Twitter's a social media, then how come I don't have any followers?
Yeah,
it's just a cell phone.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, nothing too deep, but it made me laugh.
Yes, that's a good one. All right, moving on to our first cringe post of the day. This gal has 500,000 followers on Twitter, so I feel like we can out her. But it's Joe, and her tag is JoJo from Jurors. And on 6/23, with the overturning of Roe v. Wade by the Supreme Court, she tweeted out, "Maybe someday women in America will have as many rights as guns do." And I know that this is a pretty commonly held belief because all of my leftist friends have tweeted something out like this or shared a story with this at some point in the past few weeks. And it's just really ironic to me because, do women have to get background checks to go out in public? Are there signs at public schools that say women are not allowed here, or this is a woman-free zone? I'd be remiss if we ever saw anything like that out in the world, at least in America. There's other countries that kind of have some stuff like that, but here in America, we don't have that. And it's such a dishonest take that you can kind of debunk on its face, right? Like, it's like you look at it, you're like, I don't think that's right. Like, I don't have to wait 10 days to go see a woman, right? Like, if my wife goes out of state and comes back in, and I have to wait 10 days to go pick her up from the airport, and she has to clear a background check and all this stuff. Like, it's just not, it's just so absurd. I feel absurd almost debunking it. Like, there's no good analogy. It's just at face value, it's bad.
Well, I like to compare the idea of, maybe what she's talking about is that when an individual uses a gun to murder someone, the person gets charged with murder, not the gun. And so,
Mm.
a woman, maybe she's hoping that women won't get charged with murder if they commit an abortion or something like that. Maybe that's the way that it's comparison. I don't know. That's kind of funny to me, because like you're very specifically talking about a tool and a person, as though there's any comparison in the ways that they have rights too.
Yes.
And so for one thing, it's not. As you said, it's just ridiculous on its face. If you look just from a like overview data, like what is more free in a weird abstract sense, because they're a person and a thing. It's obviously on its face stupid that way. But then it also betrays the misunderstanding of rights and how people talk about rights, and they mean different things. At least that's my perception here. I think that when you're talking about, does a woman have as many rights as a gun does? Well, when you're talking about innate, rights of that the government recognizes, not that it grants, that it recognizes, because that's what a right really is. Then a gun has zero rights. A gun has no rights. It's incapable of having rights, because it is a creation of man. It is a tool. And so, to say people are allowed to use guns in ways, people have rights regarding guns, that's an entirely separate conversation. And then it becomes positive and negative rights. And so, of course, you don't have the right to murder someone. And so in that sense, it's like, well, what do you mean? You can own a gun. And it's like, well, sure, I can own a gun. Now, if I murder someone with that gun, guess what? I don't have that right to do that, just as much as you don't have the right to commit an abortion, because that would be a murder. So it's once again using language, and in this particular case, I actually don't think it's as targeted and pernicious as some of the other cases that we've pointed out of the misuse of language or the changing of definitions. I think this one is just generally a fundamental misunderstanding of rights that has happened culture-wide and through bad education and things like that, and a different sort of epistemology that the more progressive Americans are teaching other people. I don't think it's like as targeted as, say, like the word violence being redefined or aggression being redefined.
Sure. And you kind of already debunked this in a good way, but I guess if we were to steel man this take, it would be that in the period of a week, the Supreme Court both validated that states have the right to make decisions about whether they have or do not have abortions or are legal in their state, and then simultaneously said, hey, New York, you don't have a right to make the laws that you want to make about gun ownership and all that stuff. But what people, they're kind of posting that fundamentally misunderstand is that it's like the Supreme Court's job, and you and I don't necessarily like the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court's job in this system is that they're supposed to decide what is and what is not constitutional, and what do you and do you not have a constitutional right to do, and that can be enforced on the states as long as the state is part of the federal government. And so that's, like you're saying, the federal government recognizes the right of people to defend themselves, and being able to, carry and bear arms is part of that right. The ability to kill and murder a baby is not, and that should be left up to the states to decide. And if a state, wants to ban handguns or whatever, like New York, my suggestion to them is maybe you should secede. That would be the best way and the most peaceful way, I think.
Yeah, agreed. If you acknowledge the Constitution is one leading document, if you recognize the federal government as having any power, you have to trace that back to some reason, which, whether they like it or not, has to be through the Constitution that gives it its legitimacy and authority by their rules. And if that's the case, then the Supreme Court has a function, and if that function is being filled and it determines, that you can't murder and people have the right to self-defense, you kind of have to accept that. But again, that's all if you accept the pretense that the federal government is legitimate because of a piece of paper.
Yeah, exactly. We don't necessarily think that. So, we're not bogged down by those philosophical conundrums because we don't view any of it as legitimate. All right, moving on to our next one. We got a Twitter user that tweeted out, quote, "If you can't afford to have a kid, don't have sex," unquote. "So you think sex should be a class privilege, dot, dot, dot." And one of my favorite replies to this that I saw was someone posted a picture of an Amazon listing for condoms for $4.90 or something like that. And this whole take of like, well, it's a woman's right to choose whether, I've seen some people say, oh yeah, it's a kid, like it's fine, you can agree that it's a human life, kind of like a take we've taken on before, but it's a woman's choice whether that kid exists in my womb or not. And it's like, no, the choice to have or not have a kid happened when you had sex and you had unprotected sex. That's when the choice is made. And in a culture that values personal responsibility, that's how that act is viewed. That act comes with risks, right? You can't just do an act. You can't jump out of a plane without a parachute, and when you smack the ground, be like, I'm so grumpy that I died. I should be able to jump out of a plane and land on the ground, without any risk whatsoever. It's just not how it works. It's not based in reality. And so and I don't know how you would even steel man some of this. Like, I think that evictionism argument that people come about, and you have a really great kind of like analogy for that. That might be the only one that's okay, but it's like at the same point, you've put someone in there, right? Like choosing to have sex unprotected or whatever, even if your protection fails, you've chosen to do an act that carries risk. And just because you're ignorant of the levels of that risk, or you just don't think that risk applies to you, doesn't mean that the reality goes away. It's there regardless.
That's the key point there. Yeah, that you're hitting. It's reality. There are things in life that are not fair, and there are things that exist. Things happen. Think about it this way: if someone builds their house in Louisiana, and someone else builds their house in Washington, and then a hurricane goes through Louisiana and breaks down the house, this person would be like, oh, so you think that, it should be a privilege of only Washingtonians to not have their house get devastated by a tornado. It's like, no, I don't think it should be a privilege or not. The point is, the reality is it's no one's fault that a tornado or a hurricane happened, and that's the reality. And so the person who has a house that got destroyed, they have to recoup that financial loss. They have to rebuild. They have to figure out how to move forward. And that's not the fault of someone who didn't choose to live there. It's just a natural law of something that happened and is unfortunate. And so it's like, it doesn't matter if you choose to use protection, if you choose to try to take every precaution, or you don't choose that and a baby's being born. That is the reality. Just because it's unfair, like because your condom failed or something, yeah, that's unfair. That sucks. In what way does that impact that justifying a murder or not? That's not a coherent argument to say that if sex was a class privilege, or in order to fight class privileges, we should legitimize murder. That's kind of the shortcut phrase here, right? We don't want to promote classism, therefore it's okay for poor people to murder babies. That is what you're saying. The other thing I want to point out with this, which is so stupid, is that yes, there are a lot of wealthy people who can afford to have kids. But you know who mostly in the pro-life movement? It's families that aren't overwhelmingly wealthy and choose specifically to sacrifice their wealth to have kids. I mean, generally speaking, large families tend to be conservative, tend to be pro-life, especially the more kids that they have. And so it's just really funny that they're trying to worry about this class privilege aspect of it, when it's like, actually, a lot of the pro-life movement is specifically choosing to put themselves in a position where they're not in a higher class position in order to bear the responsibility of kids. So it's wrong in the terms of reality. It's wrong in terms of being able to connect an argument, and it's wrong in terms of the demographics that they're addressing.
I think it was a Washington Post article. This lady wrote about like Texas passed that abortion ruling a while back, and they were writing on this gal who was pregnant with twins, and when she went to go get an abortion, the Texas law was passed, and so she wasn't able to get it, and so she ended up having the twins, and so they have pictures of her and these twins, and they're beautiful, and the writer of the article, the author of the article, was basically saying like, yeah, this gal, I don't remember her name. Let's just call her Becky. But Becky envisioned that maybe at this point in her life she'd be working at a law firm as a paralegal, and she'd be saving up and maybe being able to take a trip to Hawaii and all this stuff. And it's like instead she's at home taking care of the twins, and it's like Becky, the mom, is quoted in the article saying, hey, like, I'm actually glad I didn't get to have an abortion because, like, I love my 2 kids now, And, like, this author, for some reason, like, it puts so much selfish value. It's like, okay, what is more important? What is more amazing in life? To raise a human being from cradle to, your personal grave, or to be able to save up and go on a trip to Hawaii? Like these are the like fundamental value statements that these people think resonate and are compelling. And I hope it doesn't really catch on, and it's like everything becomes about me. Like, oh, well, I want to have sex, but I don't want to have any of the consequences. It's like, no, like the best things in life carry responsibility. And by carrying responsibility, that means there are consequences for your actions. And somehow we've kind of neglected that, and that's why there's the phrase meaningless cheap sex is a thing now, right? Because if there are no consequences, if there is no commitment, if there is no potential for a child to be born or made through that, then it is meaningless, right? There is nothing to it. There's no commitment made to the other person, and that is from our perspective, from the religious background we have, and I think also you can just make the moral perspective. It's just. It is a meaningless life that is devoid of reason and of purpose and of happiness and joy. And that's why the people that have the most amount of meaningless sex are also the least happy.
And I could be wrong, but it seems like our generation, millennials, and maybe Gen X, is really the ones that are championing this sort of, the editorializing of the article, saying she could be in Hawaii, but now she's not. She's taking care of the twins. And it's very ironic because millennials, rightly in many ways, also are very heavy in criticizing boomers for not investing in ways to take care of the next generation and sort of passing the buck in terms of debt and housing markets and all these sorts of things, and putting that burden on future generations and just enjoying the wealth that their parents built up for them now. And there's just something very rich in the millennials saying things like, it's crazy. She could be going to Hawaii, but instead she has to raise the future children. It's like you are, if the boomers had, and I'm not saying all boomers, I just mean generally speaking, of course, if the boomer generation had passed on this great amount of wealth to the millennials, we would just be the exact same thing they were, not thinking about the future generations. It's like if you don't get the takeaway that the best thing you can do is build up a future for others, and in particular for your future kids and family. Leave a legacy towards your family to make them better off than you were. If you're not getting that now, and you're not impressing that message and taking that value, then you're no better than the boomers, and in fact you're worse, because not only would you squander the opportunity, but you're bitter and hypocritical for calling them out. And you just would be doing the exact same thing. You just haven't gotten the opportunity. So I feel like a lot of that selfishness comes in these abortion topics, where it boils down to, I want to be able to kill a baby because I want to live life the way that I want to, without consequence or without change or without sacrifice.
Exactly. And the only reason you would abort a fetus is because it is a human being, and it will grow up to be a human being that has needs that you must take care of. And that's in elective instances, right? And like if it's to save the life of the mother, sure, it's like you're trying to save the life of the mother. And if as a OBGYN, pro-life OBGYN, I saw a post earlier, an ectopic pregnancy abortion, or an abortion, not abortion, but like a treatment for an ectopic pregnancy is not an abortion, because the intent of an abortion is that there's a dead baby at the end of it. The intent of treating ectopic pregnancy is that the fetus is removed, and if it's alive and it can stay alive, great. But if it can't, I mean, that's just part of treating the woman's, issues and everything. And I can't remember where I was going to really go with that, but like you're saying, it all boils down to majority of abortions are elective because people want to not have the responsibility of what that fetus will eventually become, which is a human being that has needs. And it's just plain selfish. It's not killing another human being for selfish reasons is never a good reason to do it.
Yeah.
All right, on the same topic, our next one, we've got 3 posts, and I think these are kind of representative of the pro-choice movement's kind of views on like the Bible and how it relates to pro-choice. And it's really funny to me that these people who don't believe in the Bible will try and use the Bible as a way to argue for abortion. But I kind of assembled a trio of them. So the first one is Genesis 2:7. Life begins at first breath. There's no such thing as unborn except in horror stories. Stop shoving your obnoxious ideas into strangers' lives. It is none of your darn business. Echoing the Reddit and Imager argument that life begins at first breath. And then the second one is, if Jesus Christ was alive today, he would probably be pro-choice, to be honest. And then Reverend Dr. Chuck Curie tweeted to the president, agreed, Mr. President, Jesus affirmed the moral agency of woman. We should do the same by honoring decisions women make about reproductive health care. So I'll take on the first one. And this is like the less sophisticated Bible verse that the pro-choice crowd tries to use, and they try and say, well, the Bible says life begins at first breath, and they're referencing when in the Bible it's written that God breathed life into Adam's lungs and he became alive. But they conveniently ignore basically everything else in the Bible. That's kind of somewhat poetic language being used in Genesis. It's not. And not only is it just poetic, it's not in lockstep. Like that interpretation of those verses is not in lockstep with the rest of the Bible's interpretation of when life begins. And I'm thinking specifically of in the book of Zechariah, they're talking about John being in his mother's womb and how, when Mary comes to visit and all these people, and then an angel comes to visit and they're like, oh yeah, like, hey, your son is going to be John. And even while he's in your womb, I'm going to breathe my spirit into him, right? He already has the spirit of the Holy Spirit inside of him, clearly recognizing his humanity while he was in the womb. And then there's a bunch of stuff in Psalms. And I mean, there's all this sorts of different types of laws within Numbers and in Exodus that clearly lays out that the biblical perspective, at least, is pretty clear that the unborn is a life. The other verse that I see brought up that's a little bit more sophisticated is Numbers 5, 11 through 31, which talks about when a husband believes that his wife has cheated on him, but he doesn't have proof of it. They have this ceremony where the wife will drink like some sort of tonic, and if she is innocent, then nothing will happen to her. If she is guilty, then her womb will be barren, and she'll also get sick and probably die. But in some translations, they kind of like fudge the language a little bit to make it seem like she'll miscarry if she drinks it, like she's already pregnant or something like that. And so people have used that as like, the Bible not only supports abortion, but it also gives the manual on how to do it. And it's like, no, that's just an error in the translation and a complete misunderstanding.
Well, and I would also say that let's assume that was the correct interpretation. It was done as a punishment for an unfaithful person. It was not done as a matter of we should celebrate and do this thing either. So it's a terrible. I mean, like even the outcome in that is terrible. Like there's no understanding of that where this would equate and be morally equivalent. Moving to these next ones. If Jesus Christ was alive today, he would probably be pro-choice, TBH. I mean, that you can't even respond to that. That's just a stupid assertion from someone who doesn't know what he's talking about. The one from the Reverend Dr. Chuck Curie, Jesus affirmed the moral agency of women. Okay, so let's talk about it. Two things. One, if you're talking about humanity having moral agency in general, like or not even humanity. Let's take it specific to women having agency in general. Like women should be free to do things. They shouldn't be slaves to their husband per se or whatever. Like there would be some level of agreement there in the sense that when we say wives submit to your husbands, it doesn't mean that if a husband tells you to do all the housework that you have to do that thing. Like there has to be balance and equity, and that's what a man has to also lead the household in a responsible way and that sorts of things. But you would also say that Jesus affirming that agency doesn't mean that he would want you to, or doesn't command you, or say, even allow per se in a moral way to do the right things, right? Jesus very specifically gives commandments of things to do and things not to do, right? If your enemy slaps you, turn the other cheek, kind of a thing, right? So obviously in that particular instance, your command is not to seek revenge and initiate aggression. And so it's like, if you're saying that just because Jesus recognized that women have agency, that they can do anything they want, well, that's just obviously unchristian in every sense of the word, because Christianity teaches us that there are moral laws that we ought to follow. Second, to say it's a moral agency, that women have moral agency, let's say because of the free choice argument or whatever, and we'll just buy that for now. Then you have to recognize that it's still murder. You like that the action itself that you are saying that she has the moral agency to do is a sin still. You have to acknowledge that. And if you acknowledge that it's a sin, you have to acknowledge why it's a sin. Why would it be a sin if it's not murder? And if it's murder, then you have to make a meaningful distinction as to why you think the law should prohibit murder or punish murder outside of the womb and why it shouldn't punish inside the womb. There is no coherent, logical basis to say that I recognize abortion is a sin, or I recognize that it is a wrong thing to do, but Jesus commanded us, or Jesus gave us free will and said we have moral agency to choose to do the right thing versus the wrong thing. And we shouldn't do the wrong things, but we have the freedom to do that. So we shouldn't make a law against it. And if that is your position, then you have to contend with the fact that abortion's a sin. If you're recognizing that, if you're saying that it's a sin, but we have the agency, we should be free to do it. And then link that up to why murder outside the womb should be any different. And as a rule, I don't think all sins should be illegal. But I do think that there is a meaningful distinction between ones that inflict violence and aggression outright and ones that only inflict harm upon yourself. When there is inward sin that damages yourself, that's still harm being done. Still should not do it. But it's obviously not something that the government should be involving itself in. At best, a government is small and limited to defending private property and stopping uninitiated aggression from others, impeding into others' rights. And so this position makes zero sense, and it's a very easy way to make yourself look like the wise, considerate, moderate. Well, I don't like abortion. But we can't make every sin illegal. Jesus gave us free will. And it's actually a completely bafflingly stupid position to hold.
Yeah, it's spineless.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to our next one. We've got the classic clown putting on makeup meme, and the first one, as he's applying just the white base, says, "I'm going to buy 8 investment properties." Then he starts putting on a little bit more makeup. "I don't have the income to support 8 mortgages. If you were financially responsible like me, you could afford to do that too." And now fully with clown makeup on, he writes, "It's the tenant's responsibility to pay my mortgage." And this is kind of representative of the argument that, landlords don't provide any value by providing housing, and they can't actually afford the house, and they actually just rely on the tenants, and the tenants, because they're paying for it, should own the house and all this stuff. And it's just, I don't know. I would love to see this argument applied to anything else, right? Like, it's like, oh, you went to my sandwich shop and you ate the sandwich and you sat in the building and used the air conditioning and you're paying to eat those things. Like, those are actually yours. It's like, no, it's like the landlord, the value they provide is the fact that they have amassed enough capital to have and amassed enough capital and have good enough credit history and business history that the bank says, hey, we will take a chance on loaning you money to buy assets because we believe that you will manage those assets in such a way that will give us our return on our money and you'll be able to pay it back. People that are renting have not demonstrated that history yet. If you could demonstrate that history, and if you had that capital, and the capital in most cases is a sign of your past stewardship of the money that you've gotten and the work that you've done, then you would be able to own a house. That's how it works. And, without the government being involved in the lending industry and all that stuff, in a true free market one, that would even be more equitable and free. But that's kind of the beauty of the current industry we have right now, is that it's like they evaluate you based on whether you have enough money to pay them initially, and then they have a bunch of risk calculation that determines whether you're likely to pay that back and not default on it. And then that's kind of held in tandem with the value of the property and the condition and all that stuff. And so, would you rather just not have any houses built, right? Would you rather not have any housing for you to rent from? Would you rather have to live outside until you've stored up enough capital to be able to buy a house? I mean, that doesn't seem tenable, right? That is not. No one is winning in that scenario. There are no houses being built because no one can afford to do it right away. You have to be the ability to loan money and to get interest from it is an incredible mechanism that has been invented, and it's really spurred on innovation. This theory on the labor theory of value and all this stuff, it totally destroys that. And ironically, it is not progressive. It does not actually progress us down towards more prosperity. It takes us backwards.
I'm genuinely confused. Do people find this convincing? This just sounds like a word vomit onto a meme, of like, because renters pay things, because renters pay rent, the tenant is the bad guy because he invests. Like, I don't know. It's just like, break it down on any small level. This is kind of an attack on the idea of renting anything ever. And that's just silly, because when you're renting a place to live, you're very specifically not, like, you're renting essentially a service, right? You're renting the ability to live in and keep your things in this place and use it as an address for mailing and for business listing and all that kind of thing. And so you are paying for a different thing than it is the property. And that's clear in any agreement that you sign. It's in the same way where it's like, if you had a group of friends and they all wanted to have a boat because they all live kind of near water. But, it's kind of owning a boat's a lot of work. It's a lot of risk in the sense that it's a big purchase, and not everyone wants to do that. Well, one of the friends decides, you know what, I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to buy a boat. And now if my friends want to borrow this boat for their parties, I'm going to let them do that, but they're going to have to pay me because I own the boat. You know what I mean? And all this is that on a bigger scale where, a lot of people will take out the loans in order to, to afford multiple houses. And so, yeah, their current income can't establish that. But by renting out that service of people staying there, they are allowing those people to stay in that place that they would not otherwise have the capital for. In the same way that in the boat example, that if you buy a boat and then you let your friend use it for his parties and he pays you for the privilege to do so, you doesn't have to pay, the $20,000 all at once for the boat that he wanted, that his friend bought, right? And he gets the ability to have access to it for a time, and then he's not left with any of the risk. But in the same way that that friend could take that boat, then they could misrun it. They could put something wrong in the engine while it's out there and ruin the engine. And guess who's liable for that? They're probably a little bit liable because there's probably, some agreement. But guess what? Even when you pay some costs to repair that, the owner of the boat in this case, or the house, they end up accruing much more cost. And it usually puts some sort of ding on their record, and that's what they're risking by purchasing. So people just think like, if I'm renting a house, I'm paying for property. It's like, no, you're paying for a service, and the service is essentially the ability to stay in that location.
Exactly. One of my friends used to own a really, really great house out in Spokane, and as he's gotten older and wanting to get smaller, he actually sold this house and began renting again. And I was like, hey man, why did you do that? He's like, hey, it's actually awesome. Like I kind of have everything budgeted properly, and I'm paying less than I was paying on my mortgage. And what's great is when something breaks at this house, I don't have to fix it. I don't have to pay to fix it. I call the landlord and they come out and fix it and figure it out. And so there's value in that, right? Like, yeah. People don't understand that, like, home ownership and property management and all these things they carry a lot of risk and work. You get a house and a tenant decides to put in dish soap into the dishwasher when you should actually just put laundry detergent or washing detergent.
That's a whole nother.
That's a whole nother issue. I'm speaking from a little bit of experience here, but it overflows and it caused a bunch of thousands of dollars in water damage. Who's liable for that is the property owner, not the tenant, and the tenant gets to continue paying whatever amount they pay per month and not have to stress about it. So, like you're saying, it's the balance of the market, and people that want to own a house need to also, and if they want to get financing, if they don't want to have to save up $500,000 to buy a house and they want to finance it, they have to also demonstrate over a period of time that they will be good enough to pay that back if someone's going to loan it to them. It's a really efficient system.
Well, and all I'm going to say is that, if this person turns out to be right, I'm going to be flying back to Hawaii because I rented a chair out on the beach when I was there, and I paid for that for several hours, and that probably paid for the cost of the chair now that I think about it. And I probably own that now, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's your relaxation. You own the product of your relaxation.
Yeah, exactly.
Paid for by other people's work. All right. All right. This is our last post, and it's from a site called Hacker News. And this post or comment, I'm not quite sure. They write, entrepreneurship is like one of those carnival games where you throw darts or something. Middle-class kids can afford one throw. Most miss. A few hit the target and get a small prize. A few hit the center bullseye and get a bigger prize. Rags to riches, the American dream lives on. Rich kids can afford many throws if they want to. They can try over and over and over again until they hit something and feel good about themselves. Some keep going until they hit the center bullseye. Then they give speeches or write blogs about meritocracy and the salutary effects of hard work. Poor kids aren't visiting the carnival. They're the ones working it. Now, this is kind of an absurd analogy, but we will engage them where they are at. You and I, you kind of hear this conservative talking point that like, oh yeah, I'm not about equality or not about like equity. I'm about equality of opportunity. Like I want everyone to have the same amount of opportunity. You and I would disagree with that. I would say I don't agree in equality. I don't agree in equity. I do not agree in equality of opportunity. I agree that everyone at the fundamental basis of their human nature is deserving of, basic human respect and dignity and the ability, all the rights that we've talked about that are recognized by the U.S. government currently sometimes. But I don't agree that people, just because you exist, you get to have a house, or just because you exist, you get to go try a new business thing. And when I was reading this, I was thinking about what my grandmother on my dad's side would think. She grew up in the Philippines during the Japanese occupation. She married my grandfather, had a kid kind of right away. And my grandfather decided, hey, I need to make a life in the United States, so I'm going to get a worker's visa, move to Guam. And so over the period of the next 9 years, my grandmother only saw my grandfather for about 3 years. And he would come back, she'd get pregnant, he'd go back to work, send money back over until eventually he could move, my grandmother and my dad and his sisters over to the United States. And then he died within a couple months of them moving over. And I thought about that, my grandmother sacrificed all this stuff. She was, in this person's analogy, she's the person working the carnival, but she's working the carnival knowing like, hey, I'm not going to have the opportunity to ever throw a dart, but I'm going to work as hard as I can so that not only will my son have a chance to throw a dart, but then my grandkids that I might never meet will be able to throw a bunch of darts, right? And that's how wealth works, right? It's built up over generations, and it is only started by one person who was poor deciding, you know what, I don't want to be poor anymore. I'm going to start making an effort to make a better future for my family. I don't expect it to just be there for me right away. And there's plenty of people, I've been a part of failed businesses before. I've lost tons of money doing things like that. I've also made a lot of money doing that stuff. And you just have to keep getting up and trying. And this person just like, it's like, who do you want to be right in this scenario? Do you want yourself to be right, that you're born into something and you're doomed to stay there unless some great sweeping change across the globe happens that's never actually ever happened in history? Or do you want the people that are saying, hey, you can pull yourself up if you work hard. It's not guaranteed, but it's better than just sitting there. I want that person to be right. It's like, especially if I'm thinking about myself and my future and my family's future, I want the person that believes that you can change something, you can control your own actions and destiny, or at least have a hand in it.
Yeah, let's keep going then, and to think, so if that's all good there, and this analogy is exactly right, let's look, what is socialism? Well, socialism is like one of those shooting gallery games at the carnival, right? And you get 50 bullets. but the sight is misaligned, and the targets have a metal thing behind them if they want. And when the carnival worker, in that case, the carnival workers are the government who run the carnival thing, and when their friend comes in who says that I'm going to bring in a bunch of kids to pay in, then he'll move the block out of the way behind some of the targets, give them the gun with the straight sight, let them knock all the stuff down because they've picked them out, and then you dupe a bunch more people into the system, and you choose that, the carnival chooses who gets to win and who gets to lose. The funny thing about this is I think that this post is supposed to be it's supposed to be sort of dismissive of capitalism and the American dream and entrepreneurship. And if you just read this in that light that you did with, your grandmother's story, if you think about this as that story, it's like the fact that middle class kids can afford one throw is incredible.
Yes.
Because in every other history in society, no one could afford it except the very rich.
Yes.
And the other thing that's missing from this, even though I think it's actually not a terrible analogy when you think about it in the right context, is that every time you hit the bullseye, it's not that you just walk away with the big prize. That bullseye becomes a little bit bigger, and the target kind of just expands a little bit bigger, and it becomes easier for everyone to hit. And guess what? The bigger it is, the fewer people need to run the carnival, because there's more darts that come out of it too when you hit that middle target. It expands and more darts fall out. That's what's missing from this. It's not just this zero-sum game where you hit the bullet and then that's it. You walk away. When rich kids, even if they're, I think we've made this point before, but it's like, even if they're they can afford many throws and they miss a ton and then they hit one and it's like, wow, your ratio sucked. You missed 9 and you hit 1. If that one makes life better for everyone, then who cares if they got 10 throws? It's better that they got 10 throws because then they were able to do something. I mean, I was listening to an interview with Mark Andreessen. If you're not familiar, he is a, sort of a venture capitalist. He was the one who invented Netscape, the first internet browser and stuff like that. And he's a fascinating guy. And he was just talking about how in venture capital stuff, it's like you're looking... When you find the brightest people, what you're looking for are the most complete ideas, and you're looking for the people who are going to put in the most work, because at a high level, when people come, there's very rarely bad ideas. It's just who can do it right and how can you do it right. And so it's like, when I think about this analogy of rich kids can afford many throws and middle class only can afford one and most miss, it's like, yeah, but that's also just like true about anything. That's true about, if you're on this, infamous desert island that seems to be perennial to our show, you're on this desert island and you're trying to build a shelter with no experience. Guess what? The first shelter I build is probably going to fall apart. It's probably not going to be stable. It's probably going to suck. But by the 5th time, I'm going to have learned. I'm going to know what it is. If I make it that far. And maybe, maybe the island's conditions are so stormy that I don't. And that's tragic and that's sad. But it's also reality sometimes. And so it's like, and then let's say Britt has a lot of experience. He came onto this island with a lot of wood that his father left him, and I had none. And he builds this shelter. Well, guess what? Let's say he doesn't even share it with me. He doesn't even let me have a corner. Seeing that shelter, seeing how he structured it, gives me at least a little bit more resource to know how to do it better in the future, and at what I can do and how I can improve. And so again, it's not a 1-for-1 here, but the point I'm making is that even in the cases where middle class kids can only afford one throw, even when rich kids get many throws, a lot of the time things are just not going to work, because innovative things take, like, the failure rate is way higher, just because in reality, in order to get something right, it's a lot more difficult. And when people get things right, unless it's corrupt, 99% of the time it helps everyone out in some way, shape, or form.
And that's, you made a fantastic point that this analogy, I guess you can kind of look at, this is a kind of a description of reality, except that they're missing the fact that whenever you hit the target, anyone
Yeah.
hits the target, poor, rich, middle class, more darts come out of the machine for everyone
Yeah.
else to use, right? And that's what they're missing. It's like there's a finite amount of darts and opportunity. It's like there might be a finite amount of times that one person can throw it, but every time someone lands it, that means there's more darts for everyone else to give a shot at. The fact that people today, you can go work at McDonald's for 8 hours and you're not going to be living a really great life, but like you'll be able to eat food and get by and live in a place, and you work 8 hours a day. That means you got 16 hours through the rest of the day to go try and build another type of skill, right? Prior to all of that existing, prior to the ability to actually, before some rich kid threw a dart and nailed McDonald's, Ray Kroc, before any of that happened, you couldn't go afford to go eat. You'd have to work 12, 16 hours to actually get the amount of food necessary and all the stuff to survive. There's no other time for you to actually be working on another dart or another idea. And that's the beauty of our society, is that, not our society, but capitalism in general, is it's like it rewards. It's the best chance you have at hard work working out for you, right? If under communism and socialism, you can work as hard as you want, but it has absolutely no bearing on whether you're going to be successful or have a better life. That's completely out of your hands. At least within a free market system, your merit can actually have a chance at you actually get to go to the starting line to run the race, right? It doesn't mean you're going to win, but at least you're there and you get to participate.
And the last thing I'll say is, like, let's say the rich kid gets 10 darts and he hits one, and then in the time he's thrown all 10 of his darts, he's grown up and has kids of his own, and he hits that bullseye and 20 darts fall out in front of him alone, and he's able to pass that on to his kid. This person would be really mad about that, but what they would also fail to see is that every other kid, all the poor people, all of the middle class people, they get one extra dart. And yeah, it's not 20, but it becomes easier for them, and no one is the worse off for it.
Yep.
Like, the space on the target that the one bullseye target has taken is dwarfed by the rate at which the room on the target has expanded. People tend to think when you leave your bullet in there, well, then your dart in the bullseye, then there's not room for another one. But guess what? That might be true in some niche, narrow cases, but in general, the target expands and there's more room than there was before.
I think that, and this will be my last point on it, and I'm kind of granting something to this post's author, but there is something about the elite class and their throttle hold on the government that does kind of ring true, right? That I can't stand some of these guys who, through legislation and through the power of the government, have kind of like maintained their status, right? Like, people think about like Amazon is promoting the $15 an hour minimum wage. It's like, well, the only reason they're promoting that is because they know that if they get that passed, while they can afford it, no one else can afford it. So they're going to just keep it going. And then I think about, my own journey with a startup. My company, we had about $500,000 in revenue our first year. And it was going really great. But because none of us were Ivy League connected, and because none of us were, part of that upper echelon, it was really hard for us to get funding. While other companies that designed like a running app or something like that had no revenue were able to get millions of dollars in funding. And so we thought about, hey, we're going to go ask our friends and family to invest in our company, and we can kind of guarantee returns because we've got guaranteed revenue and it's awesome. And then we came to find out that you have to be an accredited investor to actually invest in a company. And basically what it is you have to pay about $130,000, $140,000 in legal fees to raise $100,000 from friends and family. You can only do up to 30. And this law was put in place by these accredited investors, the people at the top of the echelon that now control the government reins, because they want to protect the little guy from being taken advantage of from people. So basically what they do is they guarantee that they can get their hand in any pie that they want to. And that's kind of more in line with your analogy of what we currently have, right? Which is you've got the shooting range and they decide to move what blocks where and who can shoot when. And then if you do hit the prize, you must give half of your prize to someone else in the name of equity and protectionism and all that stuff. But I wanted to grant that to this person. It's like, he's right or she's right. There is some crony capitalism at the top of venture capital. And it's not fair, but that doesn't I don't care. I'm going to still do what I'm going to do and try and make it happen, right? And if you want to do better in life, you kind of got to acknowledge reality, like you're saying, and make it happen.
Agreed.
Awesome, folks. Well, thanks for hanging out with us for this show. We had a really good time. Like I said at the start, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe, comment. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll catch you next time.